Alice was on her way home, driving her fancy new car, a gift she had earned through her hard work. But as she continued down the street, the blue light of sirens cut through the night, and the sound of a police car's siren was heard. She stopped, already feeling the discomfort that comes with the idea of being approached by the police. When police officer Andrea approached, something in her expression already said that the situation would not be simple. Upon seeing the luxury car, a disdainful smile appeared on Andrea's face, and her thoughts became instantaneous and cruel. That car was stolen. There's no way this girl could have bought something like that legally. Not with that color, that style. She must be involved in something illegal. Either she stole the car, or her family is involved in some criminal scheme. Andrea made no attempt to hide her judgment, and without any basis, decided that young Alice was guilty. Not because she had any concrete evidence, but because, for Andrea, the mere image of a young black woman driving a luxury car was reason enough to judge her. She looked at her newbie partner, Harry, with a look that said it all. "Looks like we have another criminal here," she thought, blindly believing her own racist and bigoted assumptions. "Let's see what she's capable of." Alice, confused and nervous, tried to remain calm as Andrea approached, but what she didn't know was that she had already been judged before she even opened her mouth. For no legitimate reason, Andrea decided she would search Alice's car. "I know what I'm doing," thought Andrea with frightening confidence, as if she had the right to violate the young woman's rights without question. "Let's see what you have." "Here," said Andrea, starting to search the car, ignoring Alice's pleas, who was already starting to feel wronged. "This is an abuse of power," Alice shouted, already feeling her indignation growing. She had nothing to hide, but for Andrea it didn't matter. Within minutes, she found something. A small bag that appeared to have been left by someone, but which to her was soon turned into the evidence that confirmed her unfounded suspicions. Inside the bag was a substance that she immediately identified as illegal, without even carrying out a proper test to find out what was really there. "You're under arrest for possession of illegal substances," Andrea announced with calculated coolness. Alice, her eyes watering with frustration, couldn't believe what was happening. "No, I swear it's not mine. I don't do drugs. My car wasn't." "Stolen," she begged, unable to understand how this was all unfolding. But to Andrea, those words meant nothing. She had already decided. Alice was guilty. "No matter what you say, you're under arrest," Andrea stated with authority, placing the handcuffs on Alice without hesitation, leading her back to the squad. As the young girl desperately tried to explain that she was being wronged. Inside the police station, the weight of what was happening had not yet completely fallen on Alice. She screamed for help, calling for her father, but no one seemed to believe her. Andrea not only ignored his words, but was still convinced of her own superiority. What began as an arbitrary and prejudiced approach soon turned into a larger scope of injustice, where a young girl, through no fault of her own, was about to be sacrificed in the name of a false accusation. What should have been a simple review was distorted by the limited and corrupted vision of a police officer, transforming Alice into a criminal in the eyes of the law, when in fact she was the victim of institutional violence disguised as authority. What Andrea was about to do was much more than a simple incorrect approach. It was a brutal manifestation of the prejudice rooted in his actions, a violation of Alice's fundamental rights. And what's worse, no one seemed willing to question the police officer, who was now feeling increasingly empowered by her own ignorance. Harry tried to intervene. "Andrea, we can't assume that. Maybe her parents are rich." But Andrea was determined. "Rich? She's barely in the neighborhood, and there's no way a girl like that can afford a car like that. I'm going to find out what's going on." Andrea approached Alice's car, who, surprised, asked, "What's the matter, officer?" With a suspicious look, Andrea replied, "I highly doubt your parents could give you a car like that. Either they're involved in something dirty, or you didn't buy it legally." Alice, with a calm smile, replied, "My parents gave me this car for my 18th birthday. My father is a police officer and my mother is a real estate agent. There is nothing illegal here." In disbelief, Andrea ordered, "Get out of the car now." "I will not be treated like a criminal for no reason," Alice snapped, clearly frustrated. "I didn't do anything wrong, and I won't stand by while you ignore my rights." "I'm not getting out of the car. This isn't right," Alice insisted, holding out her documents to prove ownership of the vehicle. "My parents gave me this car for my 18th birthday. It's legit." Meanwhile, newbie Harry realized the injustice and pulled Andrea aside. "Hey, Andrea, can we talk for a minute?" "Of course," Andrea replied, unsure of what Harry was about to suggest. "I believe she's telling the truth. Her parents may be rich, and she has all the original documents for the car." "Let's not overreact. Just let her go," Harry said, trying to diffuse the situation, but Andrea was implacable, with a fixed and determined gaze. "Harry, there's a lot you need to understand about how things really work here. We can't just believe everything we're told. Appearances can be tricky, and that's what sets us apart as police officers." She turned to Alice with a cold smile. "I'm going to need to search your car now." Alice, feeling the weight of the situation, shouted, her voice full of frustration, "I'm not doing anything wrong. This is an abuse of power. You can't do this for no reason." His words echoed through the air, but Andrea remained indifferent. Without responding, Andrea approached Alice's car with a determined look and, taking her time, began to search the vehicle. She opened the doors, roughly, as if on a hunt, ignoring the anguish visible in Alice's eyes. Within minutes, his fingers rubbed something that looked suspicious, a small bag of white substance. Andrea removed the item with a triumphant smile. "So you insist that you didn't steal the car and that your parents had nothing to do with it? Can you explain to me what this is?" Alice looked at the bag, panic taking over her body. "No! I swear it's not mine!" His words came out through tears, his voice shaking. "I don't do drugs. My parents are decent people. They have nothing to do with this. I'm being framed." She turns away from the officer, her breathing ragged and desperate, but Andrea didn't hesitate. "You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance," he said, his voice cold and impersonal. Without hesitation, he placed the handcuffs on Alice, who found herself unable to react as she was dragged to the police car. "And do you think the police acted correctly or exaggerated? Comment yes or no." "See? I warned you. She's a problem," said Andrea, with a tone of disdain towards Harry, who was stunned, not knowing what to say to that scene. Upon arriving at the police station, the tension was palpable. Alice, overcome by despair, was unable to contain the pain she was feeling. "Daddy, help me!" she screamed with all the strength she had left, but Andrea stopped her with a sudden gesture. "No shouting here!" he said coldly. Alice's screams, however, did not go unnoticed. His daughter's voice echoed through the corridors of the police station, and Captain Marcos, upon hearing that anguished scream, ran to the detention area, his heart racing. "Alice, what's going on? What did you do, and why are you in handcuffs?" He entered the room with his eyes wide with shock at seeing his daughter in that situation, visibly shaken. Captain Marcos stopped for a moment, his face contorted in pain at seeing his daughter in such a state. "Dad, I swear, I'm innocent. I think I'm being framed. That police officer arrested me for no reason. I didn't do anything wrong," she cried, her voice choked with anguish. Andrea tried to maintain control of the situation. "She is involved in drug trafficking. We found illegal substances in her car," he said, with a tone of certainty that only increased Alice's suffering and Captain Marcos's confusion. "You are completely mistaken," replied Captain Marcos, his voice hoarse and full of disbelief. My daughter would never do something like that. It must be a misunderstanding, a setup. He approached Alice, trying to give her some comfort amidst the chaos. Before continuing, check if it's already written on the channel, because the best is yet to come. But Andrea did not give up. So, besides being captain, you're also running some drug trafficking. What else did they find at your house? The accusation was launched with a defiant look, an attempt to further drag Marcos into his web of lies. How dare you insinuate that? Captain Marcos, his face red with anger and shame, exploded. I'm going to look deeper into these allegations. You're going to pay for everything you did, Andrea. I swear. His eyes were full of fire, and the weight of responsibility upon him seemed to increase with each word. The tension was at its peak. What seemed like a simple arrest was turning into a fight for the truth, and Captain Marcos was willing to take this battle to the end to prove his daughter's innocence and unmask the corruption that Andrea was trying to hide. After a tense and emotional confrontation, Captain Marcos retired to his office with the weight of the situation on his shoulders. The image of his daughter in handcuffs still burned in his mind. He was determined to clear his name and restore his family's honor, but doubts and frustration seemed to grow with each passing minute. When he arrived at his office, he found Alice, who was clearly panicking. Her eyes were red from crying, and her breathing was ragged, like she was about to collapse. Dad, I don't know what to do. I swear I have no idea how that got in my car. I'm innocent, Alice exclaimed, her voice desperate, her hands shaking as she tried to explain the impossible. If this happened to you, how would you react? Write in the comments. Captain Marcos, feeling his heart sink, approached her and wrapped his arms around her, trying to convey a minimum of tranquility. Calm down, daughter, he said softly, stroking her head, trying to contain the wave of emotions that also enveloped him. I know you're innocent, and I'm going to find out who's behind this. No one is going to make you the victim. He paused, fixing his eyes on hers, as if searching for the strength he needed to move forward. I'll sort it out. As he tried to organize, his thoughts on how to put an end to this confusion, an unexpected surprise interrupted his reflection. The office door opened, and Harry, the police rookie, appeared. Captain Marcos looked at him in surprise, still processing the recent tension. I was about to call you, he said, his voice a little softer, but with the natural suspicion of someone who never knows what to expect from a newcomer. What do you want? Harry took a deep breath, as if preparing to reveal something big. I know I'm new to the force, but I have a strong sense of morality, Captain. I needed to do this, Harry said seriously. He approached and, with a firm gesture, took his cell phone out of his pocket and showed a video. I recorded everything. Captain Marcos was in shock. His stomach knotted as he watched the images unfold on the screen. The pieces were finally falling into place, but not in the way he imagined. This is unbelievable, he exclaimed, his heart racing as he watched the recording. Officer Andrea needs to face the consequences of this. How could she do something so low? His voice was a mixture of anger and disbelief. Harry, with the calmness of someone who knew he was doing the right thing, explained what had happened. When she thought no one was watching, I recorded her putting the drugs in Alice's car. She knew exactly what she was doing. I knew something was wrong, so I started filming. Now we have proof that she set this all up. Captain Marcos couldn't believe what he was hearing. Andrea's lie, the manipulation, the evil behind her actions were finally exposed. He couldn't let that go. Andrea will pay for this, he said, his eyes fixed and steady, his tone full of determination. He was about to make a move that would change everything. You really saved me, he continued, smiling with genuine pride in Harry. I was about to call you because my daughter mentioned that you were with Andrea through all of this. Now, with this video, you have proven that you are an honest man. I am very proud of you, Harry." The captain shook Harry's hand firmly, his gratitude visible. "I'm going to need a copy of that video, and please let's keep this between us. The last thing we want is for her to know we have this." "Of course, sir," Harry replied, just as firmly, shaking the captain's hand with respect and confidence. He knew what was at stake. Before leaving the office, Harry made a discreet bow, as if he knew that what he had done had not only saved the honor of an innocent, but also put an end to a sordid manipulation. With the test in hand, Captain Marcos wasted no time. He immediately released his daughter with immediate relief, but also the pressure of righting the wrong Andrea had made. He contacted Internal Affairs and began a formal investigation into the corrupt officer. He knew this would be the only way to restore trust in his own institution. But the turnaround was far from over. It didn't take long for Andrea, completely furious, to invade Captain Marcos's office without even knocking. She was beyond herself. "How can you let her go, Marcos?" she shouted, anger spilling out of her words. "Is it because she's your daughter, or are you allowing yourself to be carried away by your personal passion? You know she's guilty." Captain Marcos remained calm, but the look of defiance in his eyes did not go away. He knew the battle was just beginning, and Andrea would not get away with it. He simply replied with frightening serenity, "My daughter's guilt or innocence will be determined by a proper investigation. Now leave my office." Andrea, still furious, glared at him and growled, "Fine, but remember this, Captain. There will be consequences." She left the office, leaving a heavy air of tension. Captain Marcos, however, was more determined than ever. The truth was on his side, and he would do his best to ensure justice was served. The ensuing investigation would be key to restoring the honor of the police and proving that corruption should never have a place in the force. And no matter how difficult it was, he wouldn't allow anything to go unanswered. "How can you let her go?" Andrea burst into Marcos' office without even knocking, her eyes burning with anger. His voice was full of contempt and disbelief, as if he couldn't understand how the captain could be so weak in front of his daughter. "Because she's your daughter, isn't she? Even though you know she's guilty. It can't be serious." Captain Marcos, with a firm posture and fixed gaze, was not shaken by the policewoman's aggressiveness. He knew he needed to remain calm if he wanted to handle the situation in the best way possible. "We will determine guilt or innocence through a proper investigation," he replied firmly without wavering. "Now, get out of my office, Andrea. You've done enough for today." "I'm out," Andrea replied with a sarcastic smile before turning on her heel and leaving the office. "But remember, there will be consequences. You won't get away with this." The door closed behind her with a bang, leaving a heavy atmosphere of tension in the air. As Captain Marcos and the Internal Affairs Department began their investigation, the truth about Andrea began to slowly emerge, like a shadow that finally revealed itself in all its darkness. A week later, the discoveries that emerged left anyone speechless. Andrea was not only framing innocent people, but she was especially targeting people of color, planting evidence to destroy lives, all while hiding a much more sinister secret. She was deeply involved in drug trafficking, using her badge and her position as a police officer to transport narcotics across state lines in a meticulous and calculated manner. The trust the department had in her fell apart like a house of cards. When Captain Marcos learned the truth, he felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under his feet. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman he worked side by side with, trusting her integrity, was involved in such a big and dirty criminal scheme. Not only was he planting evidence to incriminate innocent people, but he was also using his position of authority to hide behind his uniform and escape any suspicion. The feeling of betrayal was so deep that Marcos could barely process it. He wondered how many times Andrea had acted this way without being caught, how many lives she had destroyed without anyone noticing. His trust in the police was being destroyed. and he knew he couldn't let this go. The next day, Captain Marcos called all the police officers to an urgent meeting at the police station. He was determined to bring the truth to light once and for all, no matter who was harmed or exposed. When he entered the room, he greeted his colleagues with a serious look, but the weight of responsibility was visible on his face. He knew what he was about to do wouldn't be easy for anyone, but it was what needed to be done. "I have something important to show you all," Marcos announced, his voice cutting through the silence of the room. He walked over to the projector and, with a decisive gesture, activated the video that Harry, the rookie police officer, had recorded. The images began to play on the screen, and the immediate shock was palpable. The footage clearly showed Andrea sneakily placing packages containing illegal substances in Alice's car. The room fell into a stunned silence. The police officer's eyes met in disbelief, trying to process the reality of that moment. "Why would you do that, Andrea?" asked one of the officers, his voice low but full of perplexity. He couldn't believe that a co-worker, someone they trusted, could have committed such a cruel betrayal. Andrea, however, remained silent. His eyes were fixed on the ground, his head bowed in a clear sign of shame. There were no words she could say that would justify her actions. She knew her game was over. The department now knew who she really was. Captain Marcos, with a serious and regretful expression, continued. In addition to incriminating innocent people, Andrea was deeply involved with drug traffickers. She used her badge to escape suspicion, and all of this was happening for years, while we here treated her as a trusted colleague. He paused, letting the words weigh on the other officers. The extent of Andrea's corruption is deeper than we imagined. "I'm relieved that the truth has finally come out," he continued, his voice now firmer. "And with that, we were able to arrest one of the members of the criminal group that Andrea was involved with. He corroborated her involvement in drug transport. And this confirms that her actions were not accidental. She was a key player in this scheme." The officers in the room were stunned, many of them holding their heads in their hands, unable to process the magnitude of the betrayal they were witnessing. The trust they had in the system, the trust they had in their colleagues, was destroyed. But Captain Marcos knew he couldn't let this destroy everything they had built. He needed to be strong, to be the leader the department needed, even when the walls seemed to be crumbling around him. As he concluded his speech, a huge weight seemed to have been lifted from his shoulders. The truth was exposed, and Andrea could no longer continue her dirty play. The captain knew that from that moment on, rebuilding trust would be difficult, but essential. He was committed to restoring dignity to the police force, even if it was a long and arduous road. And while Andrea now faced the legal repercussions of her actions, Captain Marcos knew that the battle for justice did not end there. They still had a lot of work to do to clear the name of the police and regain the trust of the community. But one thing was certain: the truth had won. The atmosphere at the police station was tense, filled with a dark and stuffy atmosphere as Captain Marcos prepared to face the truth in front of everyone. He felt the weight of the situation on his shoulders, but he knew it was his duty to bring justice, not only to protect his daughter, but to restore the community's trust in the police force. Every police officer present felt the lump in their throat. Some were nervous, others angry, but all shared a sense of deep disappointment. What should be a force of protection and justice had been corrupted by a colleague. Captain Marcos took a deep breath, knowing that this would be the decisive moment. "As many of you know," he began, his voice strong but with a hint of gravity, "we thoroughly investigated Officer Andrea's actions. Both the Internal Affairs Division and the Disciplinary Review Board reviewed all of the evidence we collected. And today, I will finally reveal the outcome of this exhaustive process." He looked into the eyes of each of the officers present, feeling the weight of the words he was about to say. The entire room was in suspense, awaiting the final answer. Captain Marcos didn't want to hesitate. He didn't want the doubt to hang in the air any longer. He knew that transparency was now crucial. With the strength of a leader who needed to do what was right, he firmly announced, "Based on the irrefutable evidence and the seriousness of her actions, Officer Andrea is found guilty. The charges against her include the wrongful arrest of innocent civilians, abuse of authority, and direct participation in illicit activities involving drug trafficking." The silence in the room was absolute. The impact of the words echoed among the police officers like distant thunder that finally broke the silence of the lie. Each of them felt the weight of betrayal. How had she been one of us? How could someone they worked side by side with, trusting in their loyalty, become a criminal disguised as a police officer? Andrea, who was once seen as a colleague, was now being revealed as a villain. His face was impassive, an attempt to hide his shame and anger, but his guilt was evident. The trust she had broken could not be restored, nor could her reputation. She, who had used her badge to manipulate, deceive, and destroy, was now the target of the very law she had sworn to uphold. With a fixed gaze, Captain Marcos continued, "While she abused her authority as a police officer, her actions not only broke the trust that society placed in us, but also seriously tarnished the reputation of the entire department. Honesty, respect, and justice are the pillars of our profession, and, with regret, but with a firm resolve to maintain the integrity of our force, I announce her immediate dismissal." He paused, each word carefully chosen, and the tone of his voice didn't waver. "Betrayal to the law will not be tolerated among us. We cannot allow a single officer to corrupt the hard work of everyone here who dedicate their lives to protecting and serving with honesty. From this moment on, Andrea is removed from our ranks, and with her the stain of her conduct." Captain Marcos's words reverberated throughout the room, leaving a heavy silence behind them. He knew this decision wouldn't be easy for anyone. The pain of losing a co-worker, someone who was once part of the team, would not be easy to overcome. But he also knew it was necessary. It was vital that the police department as a whole regained confidence in itself and the mission it carried. Andrea, however, didn't move. His face, which was once a mask of confidence and superiority, was now marked by defeat. She knew the game was over, that there was no more running away. Her colleagues watched her, some with eyes full of anger, others with sadness, but no one felt sorry. She had chosen her path, and now she must pay the consequences. As Captain Marcos gave final instructions on the case, the police station began to reorganize, a new climate of determination taking over the police officers. Andrea's corruption was exposed, but the commitment of everyone there to continue fighting for truth and justice was stronger than ever. And at that moment, a new chapter opened for Captain Marcos and his team. They knew that community trust would not be restored overnight, but the first step was complete. The evil had been exposed. What remained now was to ensure that those who remained united and reaffirmed the values of honor and ethics that once led them to choose this profession. Captain Marcos knew that the hard work was just beginning. He paused meaningfully, his eyes sweeping over every face in the room, taking in the gravity of the situation he was about to describe. Captain Marcos felt the weight of responsibility. In his words, and his voice sounded firm, but carried with an emotional weight that he could not hide. "This decision is not easy, but it is essential to restoring public confidence in our services," he said, each word imbued with sincerity. "We cannot allow the actions of a single person to compromise the hard work and dedication of everyone. Here, every day, we face challenges together with a mission to protect and serve our community with justice and honor. We cannot let one person's corruption destroy all of that. The police officers present were stunned, absorbing every word, while Captain Marcos spoke with unwavering determination. He knew that his words not only meant Andrea's dismissal, but also marked the beginning of a painful healing process for the department. Every police officer there knew that their work would be questioned, and perhaps for a long time, due to the betrayal of one of their own. However, Captain Marcos was determined not to let this weaken their strength. He wanted everyone to understand that the fight for truth and justice would always prevail. He took another look around, making sure everyone was listening and absorbing the importance of his words. Our commitment to justice, impartiality, and integrity will remain steadfast despite any adversity, he said, his words resounding like a solemn oath. The tension in the room was palpable. Each officer was in a whirlwind of emotions: surprise, anger, disbelief, sadness. How could they allow a colleague, someone who was part of the same team, to deviate so drastically from everything the police force was proud of? How can someone who is sworn to protect the law actually become a part of the corruption it is supposed to fight? The looks exchanged between the officers were one of complete bewilderment, as if they were trying to understand not only the situation, but also the devastating impact it would have on their own careers, on their own convictions. Captain Marcos felt this confusion, this silent agitation, and then, with a gentle gesture, he signaled everyone to calm down. "These are difficult times for all of us," he said with profound seriousness, looking into the eyes of each officer in front of him. "Andrea's action has damaged our reputation and eroded the community's trust in us. I never thought I would have. To stand here today, in front of all of you, to say what I am saying. But now it is our opportunity to show that we are committed to the truth. It is our chance to reaffirm, to the world and to our community, that we are more than a single mistake. We are more than one person who betrayed our trust." There was a tense pause after his words. He could see the weight of his statement settling in the hearts of his colleagues. Some seemed perplexed, others with faces marked by disappointment, but the majority were now absorbing the gravity of the situation, reflecting on the impact of this not only on the police station, but on the entire corporation and the community they swore to protect. "Now," Marcos continued, "it is time for each of us to reaffirm our commitment to truth, justice, and integrity. We will not allow one bad apple to define our work. Each of you has a responsibility to the law, to the community, and to our own values. We cannot and will not fail those who depend on us." The officers began to straighten up as if the captain's words had rekindled them. The tension in the air, although still present, began to dissipate a little. Captain Marcos knew he was dealing with something much bigger than Andrea's dismissal. He was dealing with the restoration of something essential: trust. Trust among co-workers, trust between the police and the community. The word justice stopped being just a slogan on their uniforms and became a call to action. They weren't just reacting to the betrayal of one of their own. They were reaffirming their mission to serve, protect, and do what was right, no matter how challenging. The room now seemed lighter, a little firmer, as if Captain Marcos's words had rekindled the flame of purpose in everyone there. They were still in shock, yes, but they were also ready to move forward, knowing that as long as they maintained their values, they could overcome any obstacle. Meanwhile, Officer Harry, who had the unwavering courage to expose the truth, quickly became an example of integrity within the police force and was widely praised by colleagues and the community. His decision to record the evidence and expose Andrea's corrupt actions not only saved Alice's innocence, but also exposed a web of crimes that had been carefully hidden under the guise of law enforcement. Harry, a newcomer to the department, was praised for his bravery in a time of great tension, receiving words of recognition from both his superiors and citizens who saw him as a symbol of true justice. Soon, the legal consequences for Andrea began to emerge. It didn't take long for accusations of corruption, drug trafficking, and abuse of authority to turn into a relentless legal process. Andrea herself, who for so long believed she was above the law, now found herself faced with an immutable reality. Justice does not choose sides. The impact of her actions reverberated throughout the department, and the community, which had once trusted her, felt betrayed. Andrea, who had been a figure of power and respect, now faced the consequences of her deviant character. But in the midst of this crisis, something important was happening within the department. The shadow of Andrea's betrayal forced significant change. There was a new air of renewal and commitment. With the situation now exposed, the police force was forced to re-evaluate its practices and establish a renewed commitment to transparency and ethics. Trust, both internally and externally, needed to be regained, and it was with a firm commitment to doing what was right that the department began a restructuring process. The goal was clear: rebuild community trust and strengthen the relationship between officers and the citizens they are sworn to protect. The open-door policy, increased oversight, and implementation of more rigorous audits were just the beginning. After this crisis, the department began to adopt a more active stance in communicating with the community, organizing outreach and clarification events to ensure that the error of one individual was not reflected in everyone. The police force knew that credibility would not be restored overnight, but with continued efforts and a renewed commitment to justice, they knew they could move towards a more transparent and principled future. This story of betrayal and redemption was a milestone in the department's journey, and it was not just a lesson for the officers who served there, but also for all those who believed that justice, no matter how challenging, would always prevail. Harry's actions and Andrea's downfall represented not only a personal victory, but also a victory for the community, which now knew that the true heroes were those who fought for justice, not corruption. Have you ever seen something similar happen? Share your experience in the comments, and don't waste time. Subscribe, and click on this other story on screen now. An exciting narrative that will captivate you from beginning to end, revealing secrets, mysteries, and breathtaking moments. Don't be left out of this journey. Until next time.